Welcome everybody who just came in from the lobby. We have a poll, which hopefully you can either see in the chat or if you click on the polls tab at the top, if you can go ahead and click that. I'll also be asking folks when we officially start to go ahead and put your name and into the chat, and your institution into the chat so that people have an idea and awareness where everyone's coming from. Welcome. We'll be starting exactly at noon.
Right. All right. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining. We will be starting in 1 minute. And if you just joined us, please type your name and your institution in the chat so that other people know. Thank you. All right. So I'll get us going. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for being here. My name is Madi Umar, and on behalf of MilVet Navigator, as well as our partners at CoACME, I really would like to thank you for making this time today on a busy Friday, I'm sure, for everybody. I wanted to start by acknowledging CoACME and their members. They have been a steady leader in the state of Colorado here across the state. They have created a space for the community to basically come together, help each other, and solve problems, etc. So thank you, Paul and CoACME Group. Uh, Today's webinar is part of a series. We call it Share the Mission, and we will be having more of these webinars. I think right now we're thinking about once a quarter. So if you like what you see today, hopefully you'll join us for the next one. And today's conversation is about compliance. As you all know, it's getting more complex, more demanding. But the good thing is, like, you don't have to do it alone. This community is amazing, and we support each other. So reach out for help if you need to. And I'm grateful for our panels today. So thank you all. They come from different walks of life. They bring in different perspectives. They come from different institutions. I hope you will find the discussion today candid, practical, and rooted in the day-to-day reality. With that being said, I'll turn it over to Paul to get us started. And thank you all for making it today.
Thanks, Monty. I appreciate that introduction. Again, welcome to everybody, both CoACME members and the folks across the country Great thing when CoACME decided to collaborate with MVN on this, it gave us somewhat of a national reach. So we have folks coming from across, from the East Coast all the way to West Coast today. So welcome everyone. I appreciate you being here. My name is Paul DiCecco. I am the director of the Military and Veterans Programs at Pikes Peak State College, part of the Colorado Community College system. And I'm also on the executive committee for the Colorado Association, or CoACME, excuse me. And I'm also an Army veteran. And I've been doing in this role, both with CoACME and Pikes Peak State College since I retired from the Army in 2017. What I'd like to do is introduce our panelists, and so we can get started right into the discussion, which I'll talk a little bit more about. But our first panelist, his name is Alex. Alex is the Academic Success Coordinator and a school certifying official at Colorado State University Pueblo, where they support veteran and military affiliated students while navigating daily VA compliance. Currently pursuing a master's in organizational leadership, Alex brings both professional expertise and a personal connection to the military community through their family's service. Welcome, Alex. I appreciate you being here. Our next panelist, EJ. EJ is the Executive Director of Student Financial Services at Texas A&M University, Corpus Christi, overseeing financial aid, scholarships, and the Office of Military and Veteran Services. With 13 years of experience supporting more than 15,000 students and certifying millions in VA benefits and Hazelwood exemptions, EJ also brings prior experience with the VA, multiple higher education institutions, and service as a Marine Corps veteran who deployed in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. EJ, appreciate you being with us here today. Next, I'd like to introduce Heather Despain. Heather serves as the Chief Product Officer at MilVet Navigator, where she leads product vision and development focused on improving compliance, operational efficiency, and transparency in military and veteran education benefits administration. She also serves on the executive board of CoACME and remains actively involved as a part-time school certifying official at Pikes Peak State College, keeping her closely connected to day-to-day VA processing realities. Thanks, Heather, for being with us here today. And last but not least, we have Sam Michael. Sam is the Associate Director of the Veterans Certification Office at the University of Maryland Global Campus, where she has worked for 10 years in multiple compliance and leadership roles. She now helps lead a team of 30 staff who support approximately 16,000 VA students worldwide, and she is a national presenter on compliance surveys and best practices, with a strong focus on strengthening institutional compliance and SCO support systems. Thanks, Sam, for being here with us today. For everybody else in the webinar, a few outcomes. What we hope to do is gain a clear picture of what maintaining VA compliance looks like, learn how peers do day-to-day compliance, better understanding of common compliance risks, and understanding how tools like MilVet Navigator can help in support of your compliance mission. For logistics during our webinar, I think most of you already put in your name, job, and where you're coming from into the chat. We're going to use the chat for questions, however, but if you want to add context to something you're hearing, please add it into the chat so everyone can read it. Where we're going to ask you to do, if you have a question, is go ahead and click on the Q&A button at the top of your team screen. Send the Q&As in. We have Madi and another MVN team member who are on looking at the Q&As, and they're going to feed it to me so I can keep us flowing on the webinar and keep us on task. Any questions that we're not able to get to during the webinar, we hope to be able to get back to the panelists, and within 2 weeks, hopefully get that back to everybody who is participating. And then last but not least, just a public service announcement. If you're a Colorado institution, want to learn more about CoACME, You can learn more on their website, coacme.org. And if you're interested in learning more about MilVet Navigator, you can go to their website at milvetnavigator.com, or you can reach out to Madi, who's on this webinar right now. But without further ado, what I'd like to do is remind you, if you're just joining us, go ahead and put your name and your organization into the chat. There's also a poll. If you could fill out the poll, you can see the results of the poll also in the chat if you want to see who's with us today. But I want to go ahead and get started. Our webinar consists of 3 different sections, 3 sets of questions, and I'm going to direct them to the panelists. The first set of questions that we're going to talk about is the reality of maintaining VA compliance. And this is going to be a question for all of the panelists. And we're going to start with Alex. But the question I have for all of you is, when you think about compliance, what parts feel manageable and what parts feel the hardest?
Yeah, so obviously one big piece of compliance going through is making sure our documentation is easily accessible, that we're documenting things as we go through. I know one area where we've run into issues at times is where, a department maybe changes a requirement, or they change, maybe they stop offering a course, and so now they're substituting another course for a course requirement. And of course, when we do our degree checks to ensure that those courses are applicable to the degree, we'll find it's not in the catalog and it's not showing up in the degree audit, because departments often won't submit those substitutions to our degree audit system until maybe closer to graduation, which, if you're audited before then, you're going to need documentation to show that piece. And so it's definitely been one area where maybe it's broken down, or we've had some issues with that compliance piece. And of course, to navigate that, if I see a course isn't listed as part of the degree requirements, we're not going to certify right away. We're going to reach out to that student and the department for that documentation piece. But of course, that delays certifications. And so one of our strategies to try to navigate that is actually being more upfront with that need to students. So in our current certification request form, which is actually through MilVet Navigator currently, we actually have a question on there which says, if you're taking a course that's your department's recommended you take that, so we need documentation, please submit an email or letter from the department regarding that degree change, so we can ensure that if we are audited by VA at those times, we have the documentation showing that course is applicable, and students can be proactive in submitting that documentation so we're not delaying their certification requests.
Thank you, Alex. EJ, how about you?
Sure. So in my previous to this role, I oversaw military veteran services. So coming on board, we always deal with the expectations and just the reality of the situation. So when I came on board about 2 years ago, I was a staff of 1, me, right? So you're talking about, we're all well aware of compliance surveys. The ratio for SCO to students, about 125 to 1. And when we're certifying close to what? At that point, we're certifying close to 1,000 students. A little bit difficult, right? So when you're talking about bringing on board staff and the expectations of the university, it's amazing now, especially in this day and age, especially when when post 9/11 came about. Everyone had this idea of what military and veteran services look like, and a lot of it was shifted towards and focused on the programming, right? But really, what makes that work is making sure the benefits get processed in a timely manner, because you're dealing with money. And at the end of the day, there's always 2 things: you don't mess with people's food or their money, right? Because the reaction is going to be very bad at the end of the day if you're not doing that too well. And so for me, a lot of that was educating just staff and faculty on campus, as far as making sure that, hey, if we don't certify these benefits in a timely manner, there's going to be issues not only with just the students, but for compliance purposes, like Alex was mentioning before. And there's this little nuances. I think sometimes faculty, nothing against faculty, I'm adjunct, so I get it. Sometimes we're too quick to make these great decisions for programs that haven't fully been vetted, or we're going to understand how that's going to impact benefits, right? So not only short staff, you're trying to deal with certification, inquiries, emails, walk-ins, phone calls, but also to making sure programs are compliant. And it's just something always falls by the wayside. And then we're trying to make sure that we have the appropriate documentation, answering questions, but also managing those expectations and being subject matter experts. It can be a lot. So it's those are the issues that we still face those, but not as great as a level. I think it's just a matter of education and communication out there to the community.
Thanks, EJ. I appreciate that. Sam, how about you at UMGC?
Hey, good afternoon or good morning, everyone. Yeah, I think that good practice is really what makes things manageable for us. So for us, that looks like maintaining compliance day to day. So keeping school documents that we know are going to be requested for every compliance survey, keeping those up to date, like scholarship lists, tuition rate archives, and things like that. And then also making note of any action we take for the student or with the student, any communication with the student. For us, that looks like leaving a note on our VA certification screen, which is through PeopleSoft. But for others, that may be, using Enrollment Manager and the notes field there, or an internal process. The other two things that are really key for us are supportive leadership. We're really lucky that we do have supportive leadership, but in order to keep that supportive leadership, we need to make sure that we maintain good communication, open lines of communication with them, especially as things change with the VA and requirements change. And that kind of leads into maintaining good points of contact in other departments that we know we're going to need to partner with when it comes time to pull compliance and compile this information that, we don't have access to all of the financial information, for example, or the marketing materials. And so being able to reach out to those people. As far as what makes it feel the hardest, it's when those lines of communication break down. So if a POC transitions or leaves, or we're working with that very tight 10-day business deadline for a compliance survey, and our POC is on vacation and out of the office, and all of a sudden we don't know who to turn to. So, trying to work with what we have and just maintaining those good open lines of communication.
Thanks, Sam. I appreciate that. It looks like we have our fifth panelist actually here. So let me introduce her. This is Catherine Correa. Let me spotlight. And Catherine, if you can go ahead and there you go, turn on your video. Catherine is a military benefits administrator at Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design and has served as a school certifying official since 2017. With a strong foundation in Title IV financial aid compliance and auditing, she manages all military and veteran benefits at her institution as a department of one, bringing broad hands-on experience in certification, policy interpretation, and student advocacy. Thanks, Catherine, for being here. Let me pose the question to you that I posed to the others and give you a chance to give us some of your insights. When you think about compliance, what parts feel manageable and what parts feel the hardest? So what does good compliance look like at your institution, and where do things most often break down?
Well, good compliance for me is a combination of processes and then a lot of teamwork. I think everyone has mentioned, the academics department, the advisors, student enrollment, all of that is needed for good compliance. The breakdown usually happens when you're dealing with other departments, such as catalog changes and other departments moving and doing what they need to do without considering the impact that it has on military students and whether or not there's a compliance issue with what they're doing, such as a change to a program that may not be in the catalog and such. So the breakdown, for at least for me at my school, tends to be when working with other departments. And it's just really important to have a good relationship with them so that when they're working with students, they're thinking about military as a priority. How does this impact military? And let's loop in our veteran administrator in order to make sure everything is compliant.
Thanks, Catherine. And last but not least, Heather.
Well, this one actually, I think I have a pretty unique perspective on, because through my work with MilVet, I get to talk to a lot of different schools, and they describe to me a variety of different practices. And I think fundamentally what makes or breaks a school's compliance is like how continuous and consistent they are with a few things. One of them, of course, is documentation. Everyone talked about that, right? If you are great for 2 of your 3 semesters, that's wonderful, but you're probably not going to have a great compliance survey, right? You need this to be year long. And the other thing is staffing, because it seems like when the compliance is most disrupted is when a staff member leaves, a process breaks down, the director vacates, something along those lines occurs. And again, it's that consistency throughout the year. And I know we can't control what happens with staffing in our offices, but it's a known variable, and it's definitely something that affects schools and their compliance.
Thanks,
That's all,
Heather.
Paul.
Do any of the panelists have anything else they want to add? Anything that they want to highlight about maybe a best practice about what good compliance looks like, or something that breaks down that you would like to share that maybe some of the folks in the audience can commiserate with? EJ, you're smiling like you really want to say something.
You
No?
know, it's just a matter of finding the right people, right? Just making sure we have the right people in the right places. I think that's the biggest thing is, and Heather touched on it, just the consistency of it. Because unfortunately, just the way this, this business goes, we have high turnover. So just when you feel like you've got something down in place, they're already gone. And it's just how do we kind of keep that knowledge within? Because you're absolutely right. We may have this great process, but if that person is the process and they leave, you're up to creating a new one. So it's at the end of the day, it's about people, right? I mean, we're going to have to find the right people for the right positions, but also too, it's the communication when working with either your state or federal partners saying, hey, last time you told our institution this, that was before I came on board. Here I am today, and now you're telling us this. I just want some consistency, right? Because I mean, that helps us out. Just make sure that we're doing what we need to do.
Thanks, EJ. I'd like to add just from my own perspective too. Um, I know we do it at Pikes Peak State College, but one of the things that we do to prepare throughout the year is we do some internal audits, as kind of as a best practice. And I know I can see some of my own scopes are on this call. We do this monthly. Heck, I would almost say they do it daily in the way they check. And I would say where I find when things break down is when things get so busy that it's hard to keep up with that stuff. And before you know it, you're getting that 10-day warning from the VA compliance team saying, hey, I'm coming in, and you're wishing you had been able to keep up with the internal audit so you were ready for it. But what I'm gonna do just to keep the discussion moving, remind everybody, if you have questions for the panelists, if there's something you heard you want to learn more about, please put it into the Q&A. But I want to move on and talk a little bit about documentation. This first question is going to be for Heather. Which part of the student files and school documentation process work well or not so well at your institution, which happens to be mine? So this should be an interesting answer.
And I've done a couple compliance surveys without Paul now, because he likes to go on vacation each time Pikes Peak has a compliance survey, or he has scheduled vacations each time Pikes Peak has a compliance survey. But one of the things that has kind of made or broke it for Pikes Peak is those little notes that we leave throughout the certifications and the student files for those contingencies and those weird things that happen, because it seems like every time they pull the students who had problems, every time. Supposedly it's random, but they're really good at choosing problem students. And thankfully, Pikes Peak has a pretty long-term team, so there's a lot of that historical information available. But over the years, we've gotten really good at doing internal memos of weird things, or documenting everywhere we can on a student's file if we did something oddly for them. And I think having that so that we can explain what happened and we can track back what happened has literally saved Pikes Peak several times in a compliance survey. And I think that's probably the best example I have.
I do, I'm looking at the chat and a couple people put in some really good comments that are relevant to this. Rogelio puts running query reports to ensure that any changes in enrollment or tuition and fees are submitted in a timely manner. I mean, talk about critical for documentation. And Kevin put in as a response to that, we have a nightly report on any VA student group for add and drops in PeopleSoft. Great ideas for being able to keep up with the documentation. This next question is for Catherine. Catherine, where do you see errors or gaps most commonly occur, at least in your institution?
At our institution, we're pretty fortunate. We've got a pretty streamlined system on how we do our certifications. I would say the main breakdown is with the incoming student advisors. Notifying the military department that the students are utilizing military benefits. So, especially for the students who aren't receiving the benefit directly to their account, Chapter 30, Chapter 35, sometimes they just get lost in the mix. They get sent to package with either cash payments or Title IV. And, then the student is asking in their second, third month, where's my payment? And there was no notification whatsoever. So the communication is the big thing, and having a process where any student that indicates that they have military benefits are flagged right away and set up for processing, whether verifying their benefits in Enrollment Manager, collecting certificate of eligibility, and labeling them in our system as a military student so their certifications don't get missed. But that's probably the number one issue that I come across is incoming students not being labeled as military students.
I'd be willing to bet if we're able to do a poll, everyone would concur with that. That is definitely an issue that we see. Just keeping track of all that, and sometimes the VA system doesn't help us out with that either. Alex, I'm going to ask you a question I think everyone can also relate to. How do staffing changes or workload spikes affect documentation quality?
Yeah, most definitely. So as I'm sure many of you experience the same struggle where even though VA recommends 125 students, there should be at least one full-time SEO, that many schools probably are not in that range. We probably have a lot more students that we're certifying at a time. So when you're balancing that plus other work duties, and then someone leaves, or maybe you have some more duties added on, that can really throw up that balance. And what still takes time? Documentation. I know with us in our organization, we recently are experiencing some transition with our position that handles our tuition assistance piece. So we've been taking it on, going to a secondary location to help support that. And that is extra workload, having to make sure we're managing TA as well. And so for us, obviously we still need good documentation. As we've all talked about, if you're missing documentation and that compliance survey notification rolls around, you're going to be scrambling, hoping you have it, and then maybe getting dinged on that if you're not able to provide that documentation. And our reason that's really helped us through this transition is the fact that we actually use MilVet Navigator, and through that, we're able to, we have all our VA and TA in that system together. So we were able to streamline that, as previously they were two separate manual processes that were going on, different spreadsheets that were happening, and we're able to combine those as that transition's been occurring to make sure we're not missing anybody, we're not missing any documentation that's in there. That's been really key for us in navigating that and ensuring that we're still maintaining our documentation while taking on this additional workload and ensuring that our students are taken care of and we're not missing anything there. Plus, we can send out emails through there as well. So when people do leave, we actually have a documentation of all communication sent to students through MilVet, which has really helped us as well on that piece as well.
Would you say that MilVet has almost takes up a part of the personnel responsibilities, allows you to expand your capability? Is that what I hear you're saying?
Yes, it definitely has. It also has allowed us to grant more access to our work studies where they've been able to take on more pieces as well to ensure documentation is there, that we're in compliance with, if someone has benefits, they verified it's there and everything. And we're able to give a little bit more access. And we've noticed we're also not missing students as easily as this when they're on a spreadsheet. It can be easy to kind of miss a line on there, but instead in this platform, we know if they've submitted a request, we're able to process through it. If they do a drop or withdrawal, it's pushed through to us, so we're not having to rely on reports run by other departments, because typically we had to have another department run a report, and that saved us a lot of time as we've taken on additional tasks. We can just go through and see any of those changes and process them in a timely manner.
Yep, and actually there's a comment in the chat that very much supports what you're saying. Rogelio says this is exactly why VA work study students can be such a valuable support in helping manage the day-to-day minutia. Heather, did you need to add or want to add something to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that CSU Pueblo had that staffing upset in their first semester when they were implementing our product. And normally, like if that was at Pikes Peak and Pikes Peak lost their TA arm, that would be catastrophic, right? And it could have been for Alex and Laura and Dominic at Pueblo based on their old processes. And I was very thankful that we had chosen that semester to launch the app, because Alex was able to absorb a lot of that. And I already knew that staff members process because we've been documenting everything. So it just really helped that all of those things kind of aligned at the same time. To also piggyback off of the chat on my other hat with Pikes Peak, I don't think Pikes Peak could even come close to meeting compliance deadlines on the VA or the TA side without VA work studies. Like the entire front end of the main campus is run by them. And the SCOs, Sierra's one of them, she's in the chat too, their ratios are like 1 to 1,000. So they cannot be on the front line answering calls and responding to emails, right? So they need those VA work studies. And thank goodness that they are available and don't cost the school anything, right? Like that is free labor basically. And it's actually turned into a lot of new SCOs for Pikes Peak, because again, VA work studies, the veterans are loving that experience. They didn't know this was a job, and now they're permanent SEOs, and they get to serve their peers. So anyway, that VA work study program, it's beneficial for all.
Yeah, if anyone on the webinar is not taking advantage of the VA work studies, please take that away as a best practice. I'm going to close out the discussion talking to our two largest institutions and ask them, and we'll start with Sam, how documentation practices scale across campuses, staffing models, and institutional systems.
Yeah, I talked a little bit about the assistance and partnerships with other departments of the institution, and that really is vital. At UMGC, we have the Veteran Certification Office, which is primarily school certifying officials. We're a team of 30. We are, I'm sure, one of the bigger teams on this call. We're really lucky in that, and we do have a large population to manage. And because we are a little bit siloed in that our specialty is VA benefits, if we need to reach out to financial aid to gain additional information, we do have to go and depend on these other departments for that. So making sure that we have quarterly meetings with these other departments that we work with often, especially because we practice centralized certification. So we are certifying over 48 sites globally. And so compliance surveys, when they hit us, we may have one or we may have three hit us at the same time. And we're compiling information for 3 different compliance surveys. So we need to know who we need to reach out to and the best way to do that. And that becomes especially pertinent when VA regulations change. So for example, 2005, when the 8515 report was updated for supported and non-supported students, the first thing that we had to do, because we knew that compiling a new report was going to take time, and that's not something that we can get by ourselves, we immediately had to reach out to the various departments that handle that in order to create that report. And that did involve some compromise on our end, because financial aid was very concerned that we were getting information for non-VA students that we didn't need. And so, to be able to meet both regulatory requirements, there was some compromise there. And so we needed to randomize the students. So those kinds of things, that takes time. And that is not a luxury we are given with a 10-day notification for compliance surveys. So being as prepared as we can. And then to the question about scale across campuses, for us, that's especially important because we do have so many sites and so many different locations. So a lot of that is maintaining consistency across those campuses. To everyone's point earlier, documentation and making sure that placing notes for students, that is there. To Heather's point earlier, that has saved us many times, especially saved us hours of research. If that information is already on the student file, we don't have to go through and look at all of these emails and all of these student cases. And any minute saved is important, again, when you have those 10 business days and you potentially have more than one compliance survey at the same time. So to that end, we use SharePoint. We document all of our compliance surveys. We keep all of those student files ready to go so that in 2 years, when we have another routine compliance survey for that site, we're able to reuse some of that information as well, as far as tuition archives and things like that.
Thanks, Sam. EJ, we're going to have to hold because I want to keep us moving along and get to a part that I think a lot of institutions don't really become aware of until they end up starting the compliance survey. And that has to do with what happens at the school level, the coordination and ownership. And EJ, I will start off with you and ask you what documents are hardest to keep up year over year, and how hard is it to update processes and systems with VA compliance changes? And if you could roll that into how you deal with others within your college community system as well, that'd be great.
Sure. So, obviously we're part of A&M system, which consists of 13 schools. And obviously our flagship campus is College Station. So we have a big program called Program System for Admission, which essentially guarantees admission to College Station as long as students successfully complete a year at one of the system schools, which we happen to be the number one for that program. And we talk about data and reporting, right? It's imperative where every school is kind of doing their own thing. And we have our own homegrown, we call it the certification request portal. To hit or miss. It's all about execution, right? We kind of call it a glorified tracking system now because, quite frankly, the way it was designed wasn't specifically designed with the expertise of a school certifying official. So we'll have questions that relate from, well, it says I need a COE for this benefit. No, ignore that. But if you're brand new to this whole process and you're trying to follow these requirements that we're telling to ignore, right? It's just counterintuitive and just counterproductive. On top of that, too, we're trying to report numbers. I'm pretty sure for those schools that are part of a system, you've never just sat there and went, we've got 1,300 dependents. That sounds about good to me. That sounds real good to me, right? And you never really can accurately track those numbers. So we're looking at systems to kind of be more consistent across the page and overall scale. It's important because this is what helps create initiatives. This is what helps puts us in the right direction, especially in regards to compliance or things that we can do to better serve our students. And also, too, to Sam and Heather's point and everyone that's mentioned before, the time we can save as far as instead of having to track down those engagement we have with students, we're like, oh my gosh, compliance audit said we got dinged on not certifying the student in a timely manner. Well, you would hope that when you looked at the date of the COE that it says December, the semester started in August. Why are we getting dinged for being late for not certifying in a timely manner? But teach his own, depending on what they're looking at for that day. It's things like that that really take up a majority of the time. I think a lot of us would agree, right? You spend so much time digging up for these little details just so we don't get dinged on these audits. Or if we just, if we had a more uniform system in place or just more consistency across the board, it would help us out. So I believe those are some of the biggest things we've noticed, especially recently. Believe me, I went through an audit last year and I had a few words with some of the auditors as far as what their expectations were, but it would be nice if, it was just more consistent, but also too, like I said, there's things that we just can't track, right? I know I do a terrible job of putting comments in the banner because sometimes when someone walks in, the phone rings or the emails come through, I don't have all the time in the world to put all that into a system, right? It's things like that.
Thanks. That's a great response. Alex, let me follow up with you. How do silos across departments impact compliance?
Yeah, so I think we've actually, some of my fellow panelists have touched on this, but the importance of working with other departments and them knowing how decisions can influence compliance on the VA side, especially when departments make changes to programs, when advisors are advising students in the classes. How they're advising someone who's using VA benefits is going to be different than someone who's not. And if you have those silos, you end up with a lot of situations where students, you're doing your degree check and you're seeing, hey, you're taking classes aren't part of your program. And now they're upset. They're saying, well, my advisor said I could just take this. And well, you can, but VA is not going to cover it. You also, those issues of when, departments make program changes or big things come out and it isn't in line. And so our director is actually very big on that piece of connecting with other departments, maintaining good relationships. I work closely with different advisors on campus, our admissions team, registrar, financial, all of those pieces, especially because during compliance time, you need documents from other departments quite often to make sure you have everything in there. And like on our end, we can pull a lot of documents ourselves that are required, but there are still documents I need from admissions and from financial aid to ensure we're showing everything. And so if you don't have those good relationships, if you're not talking to other departments and they're not talking to each other, you're going to run into compliance issues. Thankfully, through maintaining these relationships, I have had times where actually our associate provost has reached out to our office and said, hey, we're in this meeting, we're talking about making these changes with a program. How might this affect VA students? And those things have allowed us to navigate some pieces that maybe could have been a problem that end up not being so because we're able to provide that input and ensure that as changes go, we're still in compliance. Departments know what we need if they're making changes. It's not perfect. There's still times we have to reach out and maybe don't get notified of everything, but we are able to prevent some issues that could have occurred just by maintaining relationships with other departments.
I think a key part of what I'm hearing you say, Alex, is this is not something you do in the 10 days between notification and compliance. Would you agree with that?
Yes, yeah, this is year round, all the time, maintaining those relationships, connecting with other departments and making sure that we're all on the same page.
Yeah. It's funny in the chat, Kitty wrote, I went to my VP enough that they just started giving me anything I said I needed. That's probably a best practice. Thanks for sharing that, Kitty. And Sarah wrote, I believe it's super important as an advisor to ask students that they're planning to use VA benefits and give a warm handoff to those folks who actually process it. I think that's also a great best practice. Thanks for sharing. Alex just talked about, silos. How about Catherine, in a small institution like yours, who owns compliance? Who has the responsibilities for VA type compliance?
I do. I manage everything VA, so the working with the other departments is definitely key. Also, the you have to set up systems for checks and balances, and I try to have a one way and another way, like, when you're doing financial aid, you do your math forward and then you do it backwards. So I try to set up processes where if I don't catch a student withdrawal or change of enrollment on a report that I'm pulling every month, then what I'll do is I'll leave a certification open as a draft for every single student. So as I'm going through my certifications I do my certifications every 8 weeks. We do by term, a 2-term semester, and anything that's left open, I also catch it on that end. So I try to, because I'm the only one, and when the compliance, auditor is here and everyone's looking at me, when they have something to say, everyone's looking at me, and I have to be accountable. So I have to make double sure, double triple check and set up systems where I check on this end, but then there's also like a catch, like something that can also help me catch the students and these issues. Running reports is one, and having processes with other departments is also another one. But I own the compliance surveys. They've gone well so far. I was a Title IV auditor for a long, long time. So, I'm sure you guys have this issue where somebody has a main job, but then the VA certification is their part-time job or their side responsibility. So you feel like you're switching modes and you're, running with, by the seat of your pants. But setting up those systems where you can catch everything is very important, however you can get it done.
Yeah, thanks. It sounds great to have a single point of contact, but I imagine when these things come up, there's a little bit of not liking life at the moment. I want to go to the other end and ask Sam if you could give us some insight on cross-department ownership, leadership alignment, and policy to practice translation in a university the size of yours.
Sure. So really back to support from leadership and making sure that leadership is communicated to. So if there are VA requirements that change or are updated, and that's going to impact one of our student populations, we're going to make sure that we brief leadership, and that way we get their buy-in and their support, and they can help us assess what departments and steps are going to be needed to meet that requirement. That also helps because if we reach out to other departments, especially a department maybe we haven't had to work with in the past, who doesn't really know much about who we are or what we do, we might experience a little bit of pushback, not understanding, the world of VA benefits or what VA is entitled to look at. And so having that buy-in from leadership and their support is really invaluable. For example, when the new college financing plan became a requirement in lieu of the other requirements, we worked really closely with financial aid and the IT departments, and we were able to mirror the CFP process that our financial aid department does. We were able to use their tables and their setup process, and we were able to run with their business process instead of having to reinvent the wheel, right? And if we had not reached out the way that we did, I don't know that we would have gotten those same results, or we would probably still be trying to put something together. So really working with those departments and getting that support.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the CFP. I was actually going to ask, before we started the webinar, Alex came on, was talking about joint service transcripts. Heather and I have often had conversations about the CFP, and you can't do those things without the cross collaboration outside of what we do on a day-to-day. It's pretty critical. Heather, do you want to have anything to add about the collaboration for the collaboration discussion?
The only one would be like what you do with your processes and your systems when the VA changes something. A good recent example is with all of the random different communication we had last fall regarding dual objectives. That was very, very painful for Pikes Peak. Me in particular, because Sierra, their normal person, was on maternity leave, and so I got to do this. And I bet it was 30 to 40 hours worth of work to come up with a plan for Pikes Peak that could work as part of it. Because again, with these numbers, with 3,000 students potentially having 2 to 5 majors, because Pikes Peak's been a little willy-nilly with that, there was so much cleanup that had to happen, and there was so much student communication that had to happen, and processes, internal processes that had to be updated, and then they came back and said, no, you don't have to worry about all of that. So keeping up with the laws can be really difficult, especially when you respond what you consider adequately to them, and then stuff changes and your work is lost or whatever it might be. But we also can't wait until the VA settles things to begin working on this either. It's not something we could have waited for until January to start addressing. So I don't know where the happy medium is, but it's, I'm sure, frustrating for everybody.
Thanks, Heather. Martha just put in the chat that name has changed to moldable objectives. Thanks. Change I was not aware of. I think somebody put in the chat that I read that part of the problem is keeping up with all of the changes that the VA has made. And for those of you who have been doing this for more than a couple years, that has been a near constant part of our environment, is trying to keep up with the changes. We are moving into the Q&A, and we've already got some questions that I'd like to field to the panelists. Just a reminder, if you're participating, go ahead and put your question into the Q&A so that we can try and get it to the panelists. something that I'm also curious to hear about, and this I'll open this up to any of the panelists. The question said, I'm curious to hear more about maintaining compliance for VA work study students. Is there anyone that would like to take that on? You can raise your hand if you're a panelist. VA.
I can start.
Okay, Heather.
So one, I've seen this work out a lot of different ways, and it seems to mostly depend on what kind of access you can get your VA work studies into your SIS, your Banner Colleague, Workday, whatever it might be, and or other internal systems. And so I know at Pikes Peak, they are listed as a volunteer, and they go through the FERPA training and all of that, so they can get access to some of the systems that are needed, and that allows them to provide that support. If they couldn't access a lot of that, which is the case on some schools, I think it's a lot more difficult to find things for them to do because you only have so many phone calls and emails, right? But when they have access, and when I'm sure Alex could talk to the access he's been able to give for through using our product, but that seems to be how you can really utilize your VA work studies, is if you can somehow advocate for them to have decent level of access.
Thanks, Heather. We still have a few more questions, and I'd love to give everyone a chance. Alex, I do have a question for you because this came up while you were talking about the certification request form. The question was, what questions or fields do you find most useful to include on the VA certification request form, especially considering compliance? Can you speak to that since you raised that during one of your discussions?
Yeah, I can definitely speak to that. So one question that we have on, especially ours for our veteran benefits, is that we put on that requirement for the JST, the Joint Service Transcript, because while it's something that obviously we bring up regularly with them when they come into our office, we have, most of our students do send those in. Having that question on the certification request form ensures that we can show VA, hey, we are asking students for this information. We're telling them it's required. We can also show it where when they do their initial application, it's there as well. But then sometimes I've had some students call in and they go, hey, I'm doing my certification request form, and what is this JST? And then I'm able to go through that with them. We get uploaded. And a lot of times those are the students who haven't walked in our office yet. They've just been kind of emailing or something like that, and they've missed that communication piece. So that's been really key on there. We also have pieces for that compliance that we added. Hey, anything you're taking needs to be part of your degree program. If you're doing a substitution, you need documentation from the department. So we're able to make sure we have that documentation ahead of time if they are substituting classes. We also do have pieces on there for regarding their housing, which has been beneficial. Not necessarily, I guess, on the compliance side, but at least letting students know that when you're taking these kind of classes, this is how it's going to affect your stipend, your housing, things like that on there. And then also just having that piece where we are telling students, confirming you're wanting to use your benefits, you want us to certify those courses. And they always have to check that, yes, they want us to certify on there. So yeah, so definitely JST information about how their classes are going to affect housing and their stipend, as well as the importance that every class they take has to be part of their degree program for us to certify that.
Would any of the other panelists like to add anything that maybe you have as a best practice?
Sure. I saw one in the comments that said having a financial aid advisor serving as a school certified official. Now, when I stepped into this role, I actually had the fortunate or unfortunate task of bringing all these departments together. And I know all the panelists have mentioned just communication is key, right? It's because you're absolutely right. I know, Catherine, you've done some Title IV audits. A lot of the lessons I learned stem from working with VA compliance, right? It's strange where we always kind of consider just a little bit different, but not really at all. I mean, a lot of the requirements we see as a school certified official, making sure courses are applicable, making sure that, dual objectives, things like that are translated right over to Title IV. And so for me, it really has been, it sounds simple, especially in this day and age, you would think with all the devices we have to communicate, really getting everyone on the same page is key. Because especially when those audits come around and they're asking for, hey, this student, what happened to the student's JST or military transcript? Hey, did they receive additional Title IV aid? How did this go? I mean, it really is making sure that when you're trying to pull that information, everyone's so siloed in that sense, you don't have the luxury of time trying to gather all information and to coherently put it together a picture. So when the auditor looks you in the eyes and goes, what happened here? Well, this is what happened. A lot of times we find ourselves fumbling at the words going, well, you know, huh? And that's the biggest thing. So right now, that's what we're trying to do. I'm trying to bring everyone within financial aid, scholarship veterans together, having that cross training, but also that familiarity. So just making sure that, hey, when someone does meet with an advisor, like Alex said, making sure that, hey, that class is good. It won't impact the benefits this way because maybe we have a 16-week course or an 8-week course or whatever course. And you're going, oh my gosh, the math isn't adding up. So the biggest thing really is that communication piece of it.
Thanks. Would Sarah or Catherine like to talk about either of the work studies or the questions on the certification request form before I go to the next question?
I just hired my first work study, so we will see. His last week was his first week, so
yeah,
that's
let
exciting.
me just say, as a CoACME member, I would reach out to other members to find out best practices for utilizing your work studies because they are, as we've seen in the chat and you've heard from all the other panelists, they are truly invaluable. Sam?
We don't have work study students at UMGC, but I think Alex did a great job of covering those points, the information that we need to gather and providing information almost just as importantly to students. And I hate to say it, but sometimes that's so that we can point back and say, you know, you were aware, but it's good to provide that information up front.
Okay. I forcibly lowered Heather's hand down, so I'm going to ask this next question to her. Is there a list somewhere of what items need to be kept up to date for compliance surveys? The question comes from a brand new scope, but I'd say I think we'd all love to hear if there's something like that. Can you help out with that answer?
Yes, I would say that the best resource to probably start with would be the list that we receive from the auditor of what you're supposed to compile for both your institution and the school and the students, I'm sorry. We can make sure that that's part of the follow-up email that we include that as like a supplemental piece, but we can also send it directly to you, Tiffany, early so that you can start reviewing it and ask any questions. But that really runs through the type of things that they're looking for, both at the student level and your school level. So it'll work pretty well for a checklist of sorts of what to be maintaining.
Anybody else have any other best practices or suggestions?
One, which is just keep those checklists as up to date as you can. File them year to year. Sometimes compliance surveys, you know, you'll pull 3 years and sometimes they'll ask for an additional term or something like that. And if you have the information, you need to provide it. So just once you start keeping that tuition archive or that scholarship list or whatever pieces of information you are going to compile, just do your best to keep it maintained. It's going to make your life immeasurably easier in the future.
Okay. I'm going to ask one last question. We'll see. I'll leave it open to the panel if you feel strong about answering it. The question sent out, there is one in the chat that we'll end up having to get to probably after the fact, but the one in the Q&A came through. How do you process student transcripts from other colleges? How do you know they've been to other institutions, and what process do you all use if they do not submit these requirements, or worse, submit them after you certified them? Does any panelist want to take on that question? I think we
Yeah,
all can probably empathize with that as well, too.
Yeah, I will say on our end, part of it is the student disclosing that they attended other universities on their application. If they put on that they attended another university, they will not be admitted until they've submitted that transcript. So that one's a good one we have on there. The issue we run into is that the JST does not stop them from being admitted. So that's one I kind of have to go in there and try to check. That's one of the reasons we have it on our certification request form as well, emphasizing, hey, you need to send this in. Here are the links if you're in these branches for your Air Force. Here's the link. So you can request those in. But that's our big thing, is that we have that relationship with admissions is not going to say, yes, you can come in if they're not on there. Of course, if they don't disclose that they attend another school and they never do that, I mean, I've not really run into that too often where they've said they didn't attend somewhere and then sent a transcript in later on, except for JST. As the way we cover that is just having that question. Every single time they request that we certify them, they're having to check off that box that they've submitted those to us.
Thanks, Alex. I hate to end it there, but we are committed to keeping this within an hour. I'd be willing to bet, again, if we did a poll, we could probably pick any one of these topics out and do an entire webinar on them alone. I think some of the takeaways, though, that I would like, that certainly I did, is being compliant. Maintaining compliance is continuous. It's not something that can be done during the event. The other thing I wrote down was most challenges are shared across institutions, right? So I'm at a community college. We have Catherine at a specialty type college. We have UMGC, mainly all online. But I'd be willing to bet these challenges that we see are common across the board, which is why getting together in these kinds of groups and sharing best practices is worth our time. And I would encourage, if you're part of TAMIS in Texas and you're able to share best practices across Texas institutions or whatever state you're in, to try and do that. The other thing that I think I heard the nuance at was small process improvements can reduce risk and reduce stress, right? Things that you do every year. And I mentioned this in the beginning about the small audits that my staff does on a weekly, sometimes daily, but certainly monthly basis, can help in the long run when you get that notification 10 days out. Despite what Heather says, I don't plan my leaves around. They add stress to my leave, if nothing else. And lastly, again, just a plug for this, learning from peers can help normalize the challenges, identify practical solutions. I have a group of panelists that you probably know you can reach out to and ask questions. None of us, there's no one on here that is a single point of contact expert. But as a group, as a community, we can do this. We can make it better. So when you get the notification, or even before the notification as you're practicing, don't hesitate to reach out. If you're part of a group like CoACME, reach out to the CoACME. If you're part of a group of system of institutions like Texas A&M system, reach out to the other colleges and get people to help. That way we're going to be that much better off. So from my end, I'm going to end it there. I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Mahdi Omar, the CEO of MilVet Navigator. Mahdi, on behalf of CoACME and all the participants and attendees, I'd like to say thank you for co-hosting this, and I'll give you the last word.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks, everybody. So we'll conclude with just announcing our next webinar. So hopefully, if you like the conversation today, which I think I found it very, very wonderful conversation. So thank you, everybody. The next webinar will be on June 26th at 12 Mountain Time. The topic will be announced later. We will reach out through NAFBA and Evaculist and other listservs that we have handy for all of us. And hopefully you can join us again. Thanks, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your day and a great weekend.
And just one last, there's a final poll. If you can fill that out before you go, we'd really appreciate that. Would love to hear your feedback. Personal thanks to all the panelists. We all know how busy we all are. I appreciate the extra time you put in to make this happen. Happy Friday. Hope everyone has a great last day of February and start of March. Have a great weekend. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.